Eleanor Roosevelt was a woman whose influence extended far beyond her role as First Lady of the United States by becoming a citizen of the world through her activism. Before we step into her homes, let's get a better understanding of the remarkable woman behind the walls. Born into privilege on October 11, 1884, Eleanor Roosevelt emerged from personal tragedy to become one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. After losing both parents before the age of 10, Eleanor would later marry her fifth cousin, once removed, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, creating one of history's most powerful political partnerships. Though born into wealth with a trust fund of $7,500 annually, which at a time when $300 was considered a good yearly income for a merchant, Eleanor's true legacy lies not in her financial status, but in her tireless advocacy for human rights, women's equality, and social justice. During her unprecedented tenure as First Lady from 1933 to 1945, Eleanor revolutionized the role, becoming the president's eyes and ears across the nation during the Great Depression and World War II. Yet it was after FDR's death in 1945 that Eleanor truly came into her own, serving as a UN delegate and playing a crucial role in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Harry Truman aptly nicknamed her the First Lady of the World for her humanitarian achievements. Today, we'll walk in Eleanor's footsteps through the places she called home, from the grand family estates to the modest cottage that was truly her own. These homes tell the story not just of her remarkable life, but of America's journey through the most transformative decades of the 20th century. Join us as we explore the sanctuaries of a woman who redefined what it meant to be both a First Lady and a global citizen. Our journey begins at Valkill, the place Eleanor Roosevelt considered her only true home. Located just 2 miles east of the Roosevelt family estate in Hyde Park, New York, Valkill offers us the most intimate glimpse into Eleanor's personal life and values. The name Valkill comes from Dutch, loosely translated as Valley Stream, reflecting the picturesque setting along Valkill Creek. In 1924, Franklin Roosevelt gifted this property to Eleanor and 2 of her close friends, Marion Dickerman and Nancy Cook. Initially, they built the stone cottage as a retreat from the constraints of life at the main Roosevelt estate, where Franklin's domineering mother, Sarah, held sway. What makes Valkill particularly fascinating is how it evolved with Eleanor herself. In 1926, the women expanded the property by establishing Valkill Industries, a furniture factory designed with a social purpose. Eleanor believed in creating winter employment for local farmers and teaching them traditional craft methods, reflecting her commitment to economic empowerment and social rehabilitation. The factory produced colonial revival furniture, pewter, and homespun cloth until economic pressures forced its closure in 1936. After the factory closed, Eleanor converted the building into her personal cottage, which would become increasingly important to her as time went on. During Franklin's presidency, Valkill served as her weekend escape from Washington's pressures. Despite its modest appearance, this cottage welcomed an extraordinary parade of visitors, from world leaders and politicians to activists, journalists, and everyday Americans seeking her counsel. Following FDR's death in 1945, Eleanor made Valkill her permanent residence. Walking through these rooms, you can feel the unpretentious warmth that reflected Eleanor's own character. Unlike the grander Roosevelt properties, Valkill's simple comfort spoke to Eleanor's values: functionality over ostentation, conversation over formality. Here she wrote her My Day newspaper columns, planned her UN work, and entertained luminaries including John F. Kennedy, Winston Churchill, Nikita Khrushchev, and Jawaharlal Nehru. What's particularly moving about Valkill is that it represents Eleanor's independence. As she once said about this place, "This is where I used to come to get away from everybody." In a life largely defined by service to others, Valkill provided the rare space that was truly her own, the only property she personally owned. After Eleanor's death in 1962, Valkill was sold and subdivided into rental units. But in 1977, recognizing its historical significance, Congress established it as the Eleanor Roosevelt National Historic Site, the first such site dedicated to a First Lady. Today, it stands preserved, much as Eleanor left it, a testament to her enduring legacy. Just a short distance from Valkill stands Springwood, the Roosevelt family estate that played a central role in both Franklin and Eleanor's lives. This impressive property, purchased by Franklin's father, James Roosevelt, in 1867, was Franklin's birthplace and lifelong home. For Eleanor, however, Springwood represented something quite different. After marrying Franklin in 1905, the young bride found herself living under the same roof as her mother-in-law, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, a formidable woman who maintained tight control over the household. Though the estate was expanded in 1916, with the addition of 2 wings and a portico, Eleanor never felt the sense of belonging here that she later found at Valkill. Springwood's Georgian-style architecture and formal gardens reflected the Roosevelt family's status and wealth. The property included 800 acres of land, a working farm, stables, and various outbuildings that created a self-contained world for the Roosevelt family. Today, walking through the house, visitors can see the personal touches that reflect both Franklin's and Eleanor's interests, from FDR's naval art collection to the family photographs that line the walls. Despite her complicated relationship with Springwood, Eleanor maintained an apartment here and participated in family gatherings and political meetings at the estate. After FDR's death in 1945, he was buried in the Rose Garden at Springwood, and Eleanor would join him there after her death in 1962. The fact that they share this final resting place speaks to the enduring bond between them, despite the personal challenges of their marriage. Springwood was opened to the public in 1946, just a year after Franklin's death, and is now operated by the National Park Service as the home of Franklin D. Roosevelt National Historic Site. The property also includes the first presidential library in the United States, established by FDR himself in 1941, which contains millions of documents from his extraordinary presidency. When Franklin Roosevelt took office as president in March 1933, Eleanor moved into what would become her most famous residence, the White House. Over the next 12 years, the longest tenure of any First Lady in American history, Eleanor would transform not just the building, but the very role of First Lady itself. Unlike previous presidential spouses, Eleanor refused to be confined to hostess duties. Instead, she used the White House as a platform for advocacy and action. She held the first press conferences by a First Lady, inviting only female reporters, a strategic move that forced news organizations to hire women journalists if they wanted access to these events. Eleanor's private quarters in the White House reflected her practical nature. She maintained a simple bedroom and converted a nearby room into her personal office, where she wrote her newspaper columns, responded to enormous volumes of correspondence, and planned her extensive travels. It was here that she developed the work patterns that allowed her to be so extraordinarily productive. The White House under Eleanor became a more accessible and democratic institution. She invited African American guests at a time when segregation was still the norm in Washington, D.C., including the famous 1939 concert by Marian Anderson at the Lincoln Memorial, which Eleanor helped organize after Anderson was denied use of Constitution Hall due to her race. During World War II, the White House took on a wartime atmosphere. Eleanor frequently traveled abroad to boost troop morale, becoming the president's eyes and ears in ways previously unimaginable for a First Lady. Her unique position as both the president's wife and a public figure in her own right allowed her to operate as an unofficial diplomat and advocate, Though the White House was her official residence for 12 years, Eleanor spent considerable time away from it, traveling the country to report back to Franklin on the effectiveness of New Deal programs, visiting soldiers abroad, or retreating to Valkill for personal respite. This active approach to her role reflected Eleanor's belief that the position of First Lady carried responsibilities rather than just privileges. When Eleanor left the White House after Franklin's death in April 1945, she had redefined the institution in ways that continue to influence it today. Modern First Ladies, whether they embrace more traditional or progressive interpretations of the role, all operate in the shadow of Eleanor Roosevelt's transformative tenure. Our tour takes us now to a more distant but equally significant Roosevelt home, the family cottage on Campabelloo Island, located off the coast of Maine in New Brunswick, Canada. This magnificent summer retreat played a pivotal role in both Franklin and Eleanor's lives. The Roosevelt connection to Campabelloo began when Franklin's parents first visited in 1883. They purchased property and built a cottage that became the family's summer home. After Franklin married Eleanor in 1905, they continued the tradition of summering on the island, and in 1908, Franklin's mother Sarah purchased a larger cottage for the young couple as a belated wedding gift. The 34-room cottage at Campabelloo represents the lifestyle of America's upper class during the early 20th century. With 18 bedrooms to accommodate family and guests, the cottage became a center for sailing, hiking, picnicking, and the outdoor activities that Franklin particularly loved. For Eleanor, who was raising a growing family, Campabelloo provided a respite from city life and an opportunity for her children to experience nature. However, Campabelloo is perhaps most famous as the site of a pivotal tragedy in the Roosevelts' lives. In August 1921, after a day of sailing and swimming, 39-year-old Franklin fell ill with what was diagnosed as polio, leaving him permanently paralyzed from the waist down. This event transformed both Franklin and Eleanor's futures. For Franklin, it meant a grueling physical battle that tested his resilience. For Eleanor, it marked the beginning of her emergence as a public figure in her own right, as she became Franklin's legs and eyes in the political world during his recovery. After this life-altering event, Franklin rarely returned to Campabelloo, though Eleanor and their children continued to visit. Eleanor found solace in the island's tranquility, away from the increasing demands of their political life. After Franklin's death, Eleanor continued to visit Campabelloo, even after the cottage had been sold. In 1963, the Roosevelt cottage was donated to the United States and Canadian governments, becoming the centerpiece of the Roosevelt Campabelloo International Park, the only international park of its kind in North America. Today, visitors can tour the cottage and grounds, experiencing the setting that shaped crucial moments in the Roosevelts' lives. As we continue our tour of Eleanor Roosevelt's homes, we must mention her various New York City residences, which reflect different chapters in her remarkable life. In the early years of her marriage, Eleanor and Franklin lived in a Manhattan townhouse at 125 East 36th Street. More significantly, when Franklin's political career advanced, they moved to 49 East 65th Street, a townhouse that Sarah Roosevelt had built as a wedding present. In a telling example of Sarah's controlling nature, she had an identical adjoining townhouse built for herself with connecting doors on each floor. This arrangement gave Eleanor little privacy from her mother-in-law and added to the tensions in their relationship. After Franklin's death and her departure from the White House, Eleanor maintained an apartment at 29 Washington Square West in Greenwich Village. This choice of neighborhood reflected her progressive values and desire to remain connected to New York's intellectual and cultural life. The apartment became a salon of sorts, where Eleanor would entertain friends, political associates, and international visitors in an informal setting. These New York residences represent Eleanor's enduring connection to urban life, complementing her rural retreats. Throughout her life, she maintained a balance between these different environments. drawing energy from the city's diversity and intellectual stimulation while finding restoration in the natural settings of her country homes. As our tour of Eleanor Roosevelt's homes comes to a close, we're left with a deeper understanding of this extraordinary woman. From the grand family estate at Springwood to the modest cottage at Valkill, from the historic White House to her New York City apartments, each residence reflects a different facet of Eleanor's complex personality and life journey. What's particularly striking is how Eleanor's true self seems most evident at Valkill, the only home she personally owned. While she moved through the privileged spaces of American high society and politics, her preference for this simple cottage speaks volumes about her values and priorities. As she once remarked, the small places closest to home are where universal human rights begin, a philosophy that guided both her domestic arrangements and her global humanitarian work. Eleanor Roosevelt redefined what it meant to be a woman in public life during the 20th century. Cast into the spotlight as the wife of a political leader, she transformed that position into a platform for advocacy that continued long after her husband's death. Her homes weren't just places to live. They were headquarters for activism, diplomacy, journalism, and social change. Today, these preserved historic sites allow us to walk in Eleanor's footsteps and better understand the environments that shaped her vision and work. From Valkill's unpretentious rooms to the White House's grand halls, we can trace the evolution of a shy, insecure girl into one of history's most influential women, a transformation that inspires generations of visitors. Thank you for joining us on this tour of Eleanor Roosevelt's homes. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the private world of America's most revolutionary First Lady, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of the historic homes that shaped our world.